Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Curl up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
While I've often found myself defending some conservative ideas on this show, I'm also someone who believes that the health of any society depends on its ability to adapt. That's why liberal ideals, at their core, can be both vital and visionary. But I'll admit, I've struggled with how some liberal movements play out in practice. The good intentions behind them sometimes feel disconnected from the real-world consequences they produce. Still, if conservatism is about preserving what works, liberalism is about asking, how can we make it better? And at its most compelling, progressivism is the moral engine of liberalism. It insists that change isn't just possible, but necessary. So today isn't about critique for critique's sake. It's about understanding the purpose, passion, and potential behind liberal thinking, why it matters, where it thrives, and where it sometimes misses the mark. Let's dig in generously.
So I tend to feel more at home in liberal spaces. And that's really saying something coming from a straight white woman. If I feel like an outsider sometimes, I can only imagine how people with tougher rows to hoe must feel. But home isn't without complications. I've seen liberalism at its best, thoughtful, inclusive, idealistic, and I've also seen it at its worst. Self-congratulatory, chaotic, allergic to self-awareness. In fact, lately I'm watching some liberal spaces get weirdly quiet. Like the energy is completely drained. The curiosity is gone. And I'm watching people that I admire and respect on all kinds of levels being written off just for asking hard questions. That really bugs me because to me, liberal ideals aren't about being left. They're about leaning forward towards something better, something more just, more inclusive. And yeah, maybe that's the millennial in me talking. You know, the one that my mom says isn't sentimental. We're not crying over the good old days. We're trying to fix what those days have screwed up. So today's episode is about that forward motion, why it matters, who it helps, who it leaves behind, and what liberalism actually looks like when it shows up the way that it should, according to its own principles.
When I was younger, being called a liberal wasn't a compliment. It was a dig. It meant you were soft, a hippie, a freak, somebody who wanted to burn flags, tear down tradition, and stir up trouble for the sake of it. It wasn't about compassion. It was code for being naive, radical, or just plain un-American. So yeah, even now, I twitch a little when Cole jokes about me leaning liberal. That word still has weight. But over time, I've come to see liberal ideals differently, not as rebellion for rebellion's sake, but as a willingness to ask hard questions, to challenge the status quo when it isn't working, to imagine a better future and push for it, even when it's unpopular. When I think of liberal ideals, I think of people who made this country uncomfortable in order to make it better. Martin Luther King Jr., Ann Richards, JFK, and his brother Robert, even Jimmy Carter, who led with moral conviction instead of political convenience. That kind of bravery mattered. It still does. Even when it's messy, even when it makes people, myself included, a little uneasy. Today we're digging into what liberals ideally really mean. Not in slogans and sound bites, but in practice. Because progress doesn't happen when we play it safe. It happens when we're willing to wrestle with it.
Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom. I'm Callie.
I'm Cole.
And I'm Mom.
How are you guys?
I'm good.
I'm pretty good this morning.
I think we have an interesting episode lined up.
Yeah,
Challenging.
I do think it will certainly be interesting.
So maybe we should kind of start off by defining what liberal actually means, kind of where it comes from, and also what it doesn't mean. I think it's really easy, especially in today's vernacular, to kind of like Mom said, judge based on sound bites. And so I think that it would be advantageous for us to go ahead and define what it actually means. We need to clarify that liberalism is not synonymous with leftist or radical politics. We need to be clear that there is a difference between classical liberalism, modern liberalism, and even progressive movements. And I think that we also need to acknowledge that it varies globally. What liberalism looks like in the United States is different from what it looks like in Latin America or Europe. So here's kind of the definition that we had put together. Liberal ideals center around liberty, equality, social progress, and the protection of individual rights, with the caveat of the common good being considered as compatible with or superior to the absolute freedom of the individual.
So, in short, that says,
What does it say to you, Mom?
I think the key there is the common good and that it's superior to the individual. I think that's what I recognize it to be.
Yeah, and I think that specific part, the common good being considered as compatible with or superior to the absolute freedom of the individual, is very much where those that identify more with the conservative side of things struggle the most to get on the same page. Is
Why do you think that is?
Because it's not all about me as an individual. It really is about the greater good. And I think that in some ways that's really hard to accept and recognize.
well, I think it can be viewed from that perspective, but I also think it's very much, okay, my rights should not be infringed. We shouldn't have to infringe upon individual rights in order to make things better. I think that's where a lot of conservatives struggle with it.
Yeah. This is such a weird, goofy example. But right now in my neighborhood, there are several hundred homes in my neighborhood, and we have a community pool, and we have a homeless man who is living in our community pool and is chasing people off and running people away. He was at the local gas station and he broke into a woman's car while she was in it and stole all of her keys and all of her stuff and went and threw it in the bushes. And there have been several posts on our neighborhood Facebook page about, hey, you need to be watching out for him. He's at the playground, and people are really worried about this. And the Houston Police Department has come on a couple of occasions and they're like, there's not really much we can do.
I mean, if he's breaking into people's cars and assaulting them, I feel like there's something you should be able to do.
Well, so they arrested him and then let him go, but they didn't have physical proof of it being him other than the description. And so they didn't have enough to hold him on. So there was a whole thread on our neighborhood Facebook page of this woman who was like, hey, I know that you guys are frustrated about this, but I think you need to be nice. You need to be kind to him. And you guys know I am the first person to step forward with kindness. That is my MO. And I sat there reading all of these people respond to her. And they were like, look, we're not trying to be unkind, but at the same time, we live in one of the highest tax brackets in Harris County. We are paying enormous amounts in our dues that our HOA cannot figure out how to utilize properly. But we do think that he needs to go find help somewhere that is legal, where he's not trespassing. And then you've got the whole element of him harming and harassing people. And it was really fascinating to watch this woman who posted about it. She's like, instead of doing anything, you are just getting on Facebook complaining. And I sat there going, instead of doing anything, you are just getting on Facebook and complaining about people complaining. And people kind of called her out on it. They're like, hey, you're doing the same thing. Why don't you go help him? Why don't you go take him to a homeless shelter? Why don't you open up your home to him? And she's like, well, I can't do that. I have kids. And they're like, so do we. So the reason I bring this up, there is a line between compassion and reality. There is a line between being kind and not having any kind of spine. And I don't want this guy to have some, again, tough row to hoe. But at the same time, he can't sit here and terrorize other people who are paying for this right and these opportunities and luxuries. I get it. And luxuries because he wants to.
So I'm going to just ask this question. Why is he there? Why that neighborhood? What's going on with him?
Because it can be.
Nobody's stopping him.
There's more to it than that, though.
And I think that that's part of it. Nobody's asking questions. And I think a lot of that has to do with fear. Nobody wants to get close enough to him to have a conversation and say, hey, man, what is going on? What do you need?
I just find myself thinking, what's his why?
Yeah.
Why is he here? And how can he be helped? I mean, I don't want him terrorizing the neighborhoods or children. It, there has to be something that
I
can
know.
be done. We're talking about the common good, but is that the common good
Right.
to leave him in this position, which is dangerous to him as well as everyone around him?
Well, and I think brings up the whole kind of question of where is the line? This is something, especially between conservatives and liberals, that we struggle to define. Where is the line of the government's role when the government needs to step in versus we as a community need to step in, or just as people? Whose role, whose job is it, responsibility to step in and say, hey, why? What is going on? How can we sit here and work towards a better future? What does that look like for you? What are the requirements of that?
I mean, I think the answer to that is it starts with the individual. It's our responsibility to start that.
Yeah.
And that can be in a lot of different ways. I mean, would I, as a woman, address him directly? No. But might I go with a group of people who were calm and say, hey, we want to help you. Why are you here? What can we do? Because if you don't ever do that, you don't ever know.
We're just as much part of the problem.
You're just as much
We're
as part
not
of the
addressing
problem.
it.
Yeah. My conservative
If I
is
can, I don't know if I can
struggling.
go quite that far with you that I'm part of the problem because I'm not addressing someone else's issues. I have my own problems to address.
I
Yeah,
get
but
that.
I think that if you want a solution, you have to be willing to be part of the solution. If you don't
Yeah.
want a solution and it's totally cool with you that he sits and hangs out in the pool, let me say this. I don't go to the pool. I've never been to the pool. It doesn't bother me at all that there's people there. But if it bothers me, I need to be willing to address it. Because you're right, Cole, we all have problems. We all have things going on. And so I think that when it becomes one of your problems, you have to be willing to address it, right?
I mean, here's where I'm going to
Sure.
go. If you look at Martin Luther King Jr., he could have just been a pastor. He could have just lived with what he saw going on,
Yeah.
but he didn't. And he had an idea that if we can do this and we can do this without violence, if we can show people who we are, then we can make a difference. And if you didn't have a Martin Luther King Jr., where would we be now?
So you want to help this guy. What does that involve?
Right.
Does that involve everybody in your neighborhood of your hundreds of houses? Everybody chips in $5, $10? What if not everybody wants to chip in? What if they can't afford to help him?
You
Are
know,
they
there's
now morally wrong for wanting him gone but not being able to help?
there's a statistic that says with the number of American churches that if each church would adopt a homeless person, it would all be taken care of. Now, I get that that's a real simplistic view because there are some people out there that adoption by church is not going to be enough. I think it's funny that you bring up if everybody chips in $10 and what if they can't afford that $10? I get that. And again, that's some grace to do that. But what if it took care of the problem? What if you took those 120 homes and everybody chipped in $10 and it helped him somehow? So he's not terrorizing the neighborhood.
Right. So this kind of for me goes back to the teach a man versus give a man a fish argument. But
Hand up, not a handout.
again, everybody pays $10. It gets this guy an apartment for a month. What happens when he can't afford the next month?
Yeah. You know, I don't even remember where it started. We've said it a few times on this podcast, and I was like, oh, we should probably explain that at some point because we always say just the little punchline of it. But there's a story about a mom making pancakes for her two sons. And the two brothers are sitting there squabbling over who's going to get the first pancake. And the mom saw it as an opportunity to teach the boys a lesson. And she says, if Jesus were here, he would say, my brother can have the first pancake. So one of the brothers turns to the other one and says, okay, you be Jesus.
You be Jesus.
And so we say that often. I mean,
Yes.
just kind of, I don't want to have to do it. I don't want to have to be the bigger person. You be Jesus.
You be Jesus.
But I think that it's really hard to sometimes be the one who's willing to put forth that effort to you be Jesus, to you be the bigger person. You do it first. You take your resources and you help that guy.
Sure.
And I think that really truly becomes that kind of, again, the ideological divide between conservatives and liberals to you be the unselfish one. You do it. See how that goes for you.
I get it.
And it's hard. It's
Well,
really
I think
hard.
it makes it all the more complex when you're trying to do it on a societal scale. If you want to go help somebody, go help somebody.
Right.
But Callie, how would you feel if the president of your HOA starts knocking on doors saying, hey, we're collecting $10 from every house. You have to pay into this so that we can get this guy out of here.
Our
so that we can help this
neighborhood would
guy.
come out of their skin.
They would end up crucified.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And I don't even think it has anything to do with not wanting the guy to be helped, but the fact that it is actively infringed upon you as not a choice, mandated on you as it just has to be, that's where you lose people.
But if that same HOA owner comes around and they say, hey, we're collecting $1 from everyone, and it's to go to building a new basketball court for the elementary school, building a playground, buying books for a classroom, a lot more people would probably be open to that.
I think even if, and this is the marketer in me coming out, hey, we're taking donations versus, hey, you have to do this, no matter what the end result or end goal is supposed to be or is intended to be, when it's not mandated, I think that your brain sees it differently. Your brain doesn't say, hey, you have to.
I think both of you are right. I think if you mandate that to the neighborhood, then that is a marketing issue. But Cole, I also see what you're saying. If they feel like it's something that benefits them in the long run, they're more inclined. But
so let's be honest. People are being mandated to pay for public schools, period. Do you pay taxes? That's going to public schools. Do you pay a sales tax in your area? Do you ever buy scratch offs? What about gas? But you have to pay your taxes. So that's mandated. And for the most part, people are okay with that, to say, oh, you know what? They're taxing us. This is helping our kids to a degree. Now, do I think that it's perfectly executed, the dollars that go to the education system versus where else they go? Probably not. But, most people are okay with paying taxes to make sure that their roads are well maintained, make sure that their kids are getting a good education, make sure that they have clean water to drink.
But again, I think that goes back to kind of that difference, the government's role in promoting that equity, in promoting the regulation of markets, in dismantling systemic injustice. And then, Cole, you and I, when we were preparing this episode, talked about specifically progressivism and how closely related it is, a strand of liberal thought focused on specifically the forward-looking reform, pushing institutions to evolve in pursuit of a more just and equitable society. And so I think that, to me, that is kind of the defining characteristic or the defining difference between conservatism and liberalism, is how much or little the government is involved, how much or little the government is relied upon to accomplish X.
Well, I think the question that a lot of conservatives ask is this really what we want the government spending their time and energy on?
Yeah.
Because, we can all get behind better roads and good schools, but there's a lot of things that we can't all get behind.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. It truly is a matter of how much or little we think that the government should be dictating and involved in.
Yeah.
That's
should
the defining
this be the government's job?
Right.
And it comes down to, if no one else is going to do it, does that default to the government?
No, I personally don't think so. I think it should be the opposite of that. I think the
I was just
government
going
should
to
have
say,
very specific things that it should do, that it is told, enumerated to do, and everything else is up to the people individually.
but my kind of question for you then is, if no one else is willing to do it, is it worth doing?
I think it kind of depends on the situation.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Let's talk about Medicaid. So Medicaid is a program that's put in for people who can't afford their own insurance. And regardless of the reason why, they can't afford insurance or they don't have an employer, something along that line. And everybody, because they pay taxes, basically supports Medicaid. So, except for a very short period of time in my life, I've always had health insurance. I don't necessarily want to take care of everybody else who doesn't. But what do you do for those people? Because in the long run, when they don't, it ends up costing you somewhere along the line anyway, because I'm going to have a higher medical cost down the road
To compensate
for myself
that.
if the hospitals and doctors are having to take care of people who are uninsured and can't get paid for them. They're going to pass that cost on to me a little bit further down the road. If we can develop a program that the government oversees, then doesn't that benefit all of us a little bit better?
I mean, you say that, but we've seen several instances in the last just couple of years about tremendous amounts of Medicaid fraud where providers are essentially sucking off of a system and taking advantage of it. Not to say that everyone is doing that, but we've also seen a massive increase in the cost of healthcare in general, which is weighing even more heavily on Medicare and Medicaid. And is that just a vacuum? There's been this, because you have the entire country paying into this program that is now flush with cash from taxpayer dollars, that gives an incentive for medical providers to inflate their prices because now there is more cash available. They can charge higher prices. So there is a balancing act there. But if you go and you start to take that in one direction or the other, I foresee significant issues going both ways. If you now have this government mandate that says, okay, we're going to fix these prices for medical attention, well, now you have removed the incentive for someone to become a doctor. But if you go the other way and you deregulate it so heavily, well, now you run into the same issues that you're running with a lot of these unregulated corporations, where now, because there is no regulation, not only is there maybe a little bit too much incentive that gives these doctors the ability to name their price, and it costs everyone significantly more due solely on greed. Not to say that all doctors are greedy. There are great doctors out there. There are also some doctors who became doctors because they knew that it could make them very wealthy. And so I very much think that it is about finding a middle ground that works. But there's something that I heard here recently, that an interviewer was talking to someone and they say, so you're very much for heavily regulated economies. And the guy says, no, 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 no. I am very much for carefully regulated economies, which is very different.
I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Both the definition there and carefully regulated.
yeah, there has to be a balancing act.
There is. And I mean, you brought up fraud, and I'm in the healthcare industry, so Medicare is a big piece, and CMS has been looking for fraud and talking about fraud my entire career. And yet I've seen very little that has accomplished much about finding that fraud. And I'm not saying that the OIG doesn't come up. I mean, they produce a monthly report about how many millions of dollars that they found in fraud and who's been prosecuted and all this. But we haven't really stopped the fraud. And that somebody who's worked for companies that have integrity look at this and think, okay, this looks a lot easier to me. You know, I find it just absolutely comical, because what they do when I get a new provider, they do what's called a site visit. And so several months into this, they go and they say, oh, do you have signage that says this is who you are? Are you really in that location? And do you have a phone number that people can reach you after hours? It's about a 10-minute visit. Sometimes you don't even know that they've been there because they don't even have to talk to you about it. That's not necessarily fraud prevention. I mean, I understand that maybe, but here's the deal. What they're finding in California is that a provider has 3 different entities at the very same address, and they're not doing business there. They've hired somebody that answers the phone for them, but they're not seeing patients. They don't have medical staff. That seems a lot easier to detect than what we're doing. And this is me coming in and saying, our government isn't doing a very good job here. And maybe that's the bureaucracy. Maybe that is some of the lobbying that happens at the same time. But I mean, I've been in this industry for 30 years and we're still having conversations about this and not seemingly making significant inroads.
I was going to say
Go
the boat
through
is just as full of water as it has ever been.
As a Medicare provider, we go through multiple kinds of audits. Why are they not catching this more?
So I look at this from kind of a different perspective. You talked about, paying into Medicare and not wanting to pay for high insurance costs. Like it's one or the other. But I feel like the end result is kind of the same. You can either diffuse the cost by saying, hey, everybody's going to pay into Medicare throughout all of your taxes with all of this your entire life. So then when you need it, it's there. When anybody needs it, it's there. Or we cut that out altogether and say, we're just going to make medical prices higher. We're going to make all of those doctor visits and all of those inquiries at healthcare facilities higher. Either way, you're paying the same. You're paying just as much.
There has to be something in the middle. There has to
Does
be.
there? I mean,
Yes.
I think that goes back to our conversation of why finding solutions to the actual problems rather than the symptoms themselves. And I've said this before. I think that we need to go and reevaluate the entire system of how things are being built. And Mom, I'm not trying to put you on blast at all, but you have been victim to this. You have had doctors bill you for things that they didn't do. And 99% of the population is just going to say, okay, but you're educated enough on the history of the billing cycle, on how all of these things are built and how they're coded and all of this to look at those itemized bills and say, hold on, you didn't provide that service that you billed me for. And how much time alone has it cost you as the person who was wronged to get it all corrected?
And how little did I get out of it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you report somebody as being fraudulent and you don't even get a response back from your insurance company.
Yeah. They're making you jump through all of these hoops to prove that you were wronged.
I think that they're just not interested in identifying it because it's a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
I mean, then you have to do something about it.
I think that you hit the nail on the head when we're talking about this is the result of extreme bureaucracy. This is all of the red tape that is put in place to protect us that is harming us. We're literally being choked by the red tape that is supposed to protect us.
So just to circle back, I know that liberalism, the idea there is that we want more government, but I don't know that that's really the case. I think we want, what was the word you used? Effective government?
Careful.
Yeah, carefully
Careful.
regulated. Yeah,
Yes.
effective. And I'm with you. And so let's talk about some other examples of progressivism and liberalism, because I think they'll give us an opportunity to illustrate some of these ideas a little bit more. So kind of going several steps back in history, John Locke's ideals of natural rights, consent of the governed, and freedom of thought is kind of some founding principles for classic liberalism.
Who is that? Cole? John Locke?
A
I don't
guy
know
who
that name.
thought of liberalism.
Okay.
He was an English philosopher and a physician.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So classical liberalism very much emphasized having a limited government and strong individual freedoms. More modern liberalism has expanded to a degree to include social safety nets, civil rights, and economic justice. So you're talking about things in modern society like Medicare and Medicaid, public education. You're thinking things like Social Security, which are kind of some of those social safety nets.
But really quick, when you're sitting here talking about it being founded with the emphasis on limited government and individual rights, that sure sends up a flag to me that says these are the same kind of traditional values of conservatism.
Well,
Limited
conservatism
government.
sprang out of classical liberalism as well.
Right, which is so fascinating to me. We have taken them to so extremes and said, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Whichever side you are fighting for, whichever team you're on, the other team is totally wrong and you have to win. But the concept is very, very similar. It sounds to me a lot like Santa Claus. So we call him Santa Claus versus somebody might call him Kris Kringle versus somebody might call him Saint Nicholas and all of these things. But the general concept is you've got a fat dude coming into your house giving you presents. That's what it is. And no matter where you stand on the belief scale of that, the concept is the same. We just call them different names. And there's a little bit of differences here and there, but it's essentially the same.
Yeah.
Don't laugh. Does it not sound the same?
It was Cole's response. Yeah, that made me laugh.
I mean, the execution of Christmas is by and large the same.
But the premise is the same.
Yes. So talking about kind of early progressives, really in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we start seeing these reform movements responding to the Industrial Revolution by and large. There is a lot of iniquity and inequality across different societal hierarchies, kind of similar to what we're seeing right now. So you have people like Jane Addams, Theodore Roosevelt and his Square Deal, FDR and his New Deal, and later LBJ with the Great Society programs that were very much talked about and very lauded during their times. Now, I think that there are definitely some nuances in all of those categories, but just to kind of talk about what they were trying to accomplish, Theodore Roosevelt's Square Deal was largely a domestic policy agenda that focused on fairness for workers, regulation of corporations, and protection of consumers and natural resources. And I think that generally speaking, that those are pretty good ideals, but how you execute achieving that is also very, very important. It's one thing to say, hey, we want all of this, and if we're going to do things from a standpoint of compassion to try and make things more fair and equal for everyone, great. If it is, I'm just going to take this from you and give it to everybody else, maybe that's not quite as effective, because now you have someone who is being disadvantaged by these policies so that other people can become advantaged.
I truly think of that like a trip. Hey guys, we've all decided we want to go to Las Vegas, right? But how we decide to get there, are we going to road trip? So it takes us 2 weeks to get there and we're going to see the world's biggest ball of yarn in the process? Or are we going to hop on a first class flight so that we can be there here in the next couple of hours? The costs are different. The way that we go about executing getting to Las Vegas is totally and completely debatable and could mean different things to each of us. Well, this is what that impacts my budget and how that works. And this is how it impacts my time and how much time I have to devote to this trip to Las Vegas. It's the execution that really changes how it all works out.
And I honestly think that that's where the biggest disconnect between conservatives and modern liberals is in the execution.
Right.
And so I think that's where, honestly, we should spend a lot of our time, is trying to understand that nuance and trying to figure out what the execution should be. And I mean, going back to our Federalist 51, that's very much the reason our government was structured the way that it was, is to try and provide an opportunity for that nuance to be discussed, for things to take so long to figure out, because it's really important to do that. But
here's the deal. if you're going to talk nuance, what you have to understand is that you cannot just jump in and say, I'm right and you're wrong. You have to start listening. You have to
You have
start
to accept
communicating
the
and
nuance.
collaborating and doing it together. Kelly, what were some of the definitions that we got on TikTok of what liberalism is?
They were pretty kind of cold.
Silly.
And so what we got were outrage. That's what Dems excel at. Hating the country and themselves. Forced on everyone.
But see,
Delusion.
you cannot use that as your background to start a conversation.
Right.
And this is why we're doing this series, and where we're going wrong is you can't have those kinds of thoughts and that come to some type of collaboration. You can't do it.
So
A closed-minded conversation is not a conversation. It's a lecture.
Yeah.
there's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt from a speech that he made that I strongly suggest you go give a read, because it's very, very interesting the way that he speaks. But there's one line where he says, "But when I say that I am for the square deal, I mean not merely that I stand for fair play under the present rules of the game, but I stand for having those rules changed so as to work for a more substantial equality of opportunity and of reward for equally good service."
Yes.
And I think that that's really important, because I do think that Theodore Roosevelt was one of the early examples in American politics of a progressive that I can get on the same page with on a lot of topics, because it is about saying, okay, you don't get to take advantage of these people because they have less money or less power than you. And I do think that the government, to a degree, has a responsibility to do that. But I think you have to be very careful about how you go about doing that. I don't think that you can just continue to throw regulations and pile them up to constrict the ability for people to innovate, to come up with new products, because in the long run, that is to everyone's detriment, not just the ultra wealthy or the ultra powerful. It sucks all of the oxygen out of the room and prevents all fire when you need some to keep yourself warm.
The spark of it. And I think it goes back to what Mom said here a few episodes ago. Just because Mark Zuckerberg makes more money than I do doesn't mean that his representation should be different than mine.
Sorry, Mark.
And
No,
in
you're
that
not.
particular speech, Theodore Roosevelt speaks heavily against special interests and saying that, hey, these people, just because they have more money, just because they have more power, doesn't mean that they should have more influence in politics. And I think
Well,
that's
and
really important to realize.
He's also coming out of an episode where you had Teapot Dome and you had some significant corruption going on. I mean, he's trying to fight that. So
Yeah.
you have to put it also into the context of where you are at the same time. And here's the truth. You have to look at the historical context. You have to do something, and you have to plan for the future all at the same time. And you have to address all of those issues. But you know what? We do that everyday living. So we can do that in government.
Yeah, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
No,
Yeah.
but you've got to have a conversation. You cannot just say,
I don't like you. End
they're
of
mean,
conversation.
I don't like them.
Yeah.
They're stupid, I don't like them. I'm not going to do anything.
I disagree. So we can't talk anymore.
Yeah. You can't do it. You're not going to accomplish anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of.
I don't call him Saint Nick, so no Christmas presents for you.
Yeah. So kind of in that same vein, another Roosevelt, one who at the time was very well liked. And the more I look into this particular time period, the more I see kind of the instruments of power that were being utilized, the more I see us repeating that exact same history right now. FDR has a quote that is used often. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. FDR also used certain powers that he had to implement the New Deal as opposed to the Square Deal. The New Deal was a sweeping series of government programs and reforms with the intention largely to provide economic relief, recovery, and reform during the Great Depression. But the more you look into it, the more it looks a lot like what the current administration is doing, where there was a stacking of the Supreme Court in his favor. There were a tremendous amount of executive orders going out to implement these rules, many of which were later overturned. But a lot of these economic policies, a lot of this, okay, it's government's job to come in to step in and fix this, which is very contradictory to the conservative way of thinking with their laissez-faire economics. This very heavily regulated policy comes in, and oftentimes the water there gets very, very muddy because of the political climate of the time and what else is going on. We're right before and starting into World War II. You also have the only president to serve more than 2 terms, and he's utilizing these policies and this power. He's exercising his executive power in a way that is, again, very similar to what we're seeing now, kind of in a different way, having the government step in. And in the kind of microeconomic landscape at the time, yeah, the unemployment rate did go down significantly because the government was getting bigger than it had ever been before. During FDR's term, the government was the largest employer by far in the entire nation. So then, as those public works, as all of that government hiring, once they completed the jobs that they were set to complete, once they'd spent the money that was earmarked for these projects, they're now unemployed again, and unemployment spikes right back up. Maybe not as high as it was before, but you have a lot of consequences that are pointed out on a macroeconomic scale to say, hey, these policies were actually very detrimental to people. You had huge increases in taxes at the time. I mean, income taxes virtually tripled during his administration. You now have excise taxes that were implemented on like luxury items, alcohol, cigarettes, electricity, radios, movie tickets, all kinds of things. Inheritance taxes at this point, where the government is spending so much more to try and offset this economic downturn, this depression, that they have to increase their revenue. So they literally increase their taxes threefold. Well, when you have a society that is at that point probably even more so economically diverse, you have an extremely wide divide, a very small population of large, rich people and corporations. And again, the vast majority of people in low to middle income households. Well, because there are just simply so many more of those people, it is much easier to raise revenue by taxing those people quite heavily. And so you have these taxes implemented on the lower and middle classes disproportionately. And so a lot of economists say that, okay, while maybe the idea behind the New Deal was good, the intentions were good, the execution there was, in their opinion, very detrimental to the people that it was supposed to be trying to help.
I'm not sure I agree with you on all of that. And I know that you've looked at it more in depth than I have, but I think of my grandparents and my grandfather who, ended up employed by the government to build some dams. And that is not the reaction that they got. And the items that you mentioned, going to the movies and gasoline, those weren't items that were actually utilized by that generation that was jobless because there just wasn't a job to be had. So I want to look at that in a little bit more depth to see where that, did it really affect that group of people who weren't even employed at the time? And because that was the issue with the Great Depression, is so many people couldn't even find a job, couldn't make any money. And so when you look at the New Deal, that was part of the program, was to get people employed. And if the government had to employ them, then let's put a program in to do that.
Sure. But I mean, that kind of goes back to that big government. What are they employing them to do? Because public works only go so far. Eventually, those projects are done, and now unemployment goes right back. So I do think it's a lot more nuanced than that. But from a macro scale, some economists believe that it was quite detrimental to the economy. And really, the only reason that it appeared to be effective was the large scale manufacturing that took place at the end of his administration with World War II, because we had to. it was democracy, freedom of the Western world was at stake with the Nazis running rampant across Europe. So now we have to say, okay, we're now going to start to incentivize all of these corporations. I mean, to a degree, they almost commandeered a lot of the manufacturing to say, okay, we're going to do this from a capitalist perspective, but you're going to make all of this stuff for us because we need it to beat the Nazis. We need it to beat Japan. And so all of this manufacturing and this massive need for employment that is not necessarily government employment, but stems from the need of the government to arm their military and arm the militaries of the world to stand up against this threat, was much more efficient at restoring the economy than the social works programs. Not to say that social work programs are bad, just to say the execution of the New Deal is very much disputed today as to its efficacy. Kind of just to touch on one more kind of progressive administration from that same kind of era is Lyndon B. Johnson and his Great Society, which was a very ambitious vision to eliminate poverty and racial injustice through landmark legislation on civil rights, education, healthcare, and social welfare. So this is kind of where we start to see integration in society, this drive for diversity, which not something I'm disputing as being bad, but you also start to see a lot of these kind of government assistance programs. LBJ said, "We seek an America where we more perfectly realize the promise of liberty and equality expressed in the Declaration of Independence," which I think is a very admirable thing to say. And the intention there I perceive as being good. The execution, however, is very, very important as to how that's done, because it can't just be, I'm going to take away from these people and give to these people. It has to be handled more delicately than that, in my personal perspective. But Callie has a point here that I'd be really interested to talk about: liberal ideals not being exclusive to liberals. You could argue that Abraham Lincoln was acting on deeply progressive values when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, so maybe it isn't what party claims liberalism, but who's willing to live it out when it costs them something. And so, I mean, I think that goes back to the previous conversation that we were having about the guy in our neighborhood pool. It's not about who claims that they want to be nice. It's who's willing to actually foot the bill to go be nice.
And so, I mean, I don't think that parties inherently have a claim to liberalism or conservatism, because you have conservative Democrats and you have liberal Republicans. I think largely the difference between the two is the approach. In the long run, I think they both want the same thing.
Yeah, just how we get there. So one of the things that I think that was really helpful, at least for me, when we were talking about conservatism, was going through the actual core pillars of conservatism, the themes. And so we went ahead and put together a couple of from the liberal side of this, what that actually means and what liberals are supposed to stand for. Whether or not they do, fine, but this is what they're supposed to stand for. And here's kind of what we came up with: equity and equality. Belief that equal opportunity often requires an unequal starting resources to correct systematic imbalance. Fair isn't always equal. Sometimes people need different support to get to the same place. And I think that there's, again, that truly, in my mind, comes down to the execution of it. How we're going to get there, how we're going to make this the case, is the part that is most widely debatable. The second one is progress and reform, a willingness to challenge tradition and push for systemic change. That's one of those things that kind of feels in direct opposition of conservatism. Hey, tradition, this is what works. This is how we're going to do it. We don't want to change. We certainly don't want to change too fast. Whereas liberals are much more willing to go and say, hey, let's try for something new so that we can find a better outcome. I think it's a Trace Adkins song. The only thing that stays the same is everything changes. Change is inevitable, but sometimes it's necessary. We can get better. We can get smarter. We can think about things differently. And so being open to change, I think, is one of those really serious foundational aspects of liberalism. The next one is government is a tool for good. Belief that the government should level the playing field through policy. whether that's welfare, healthcare, or environmental regulation. And I think that that one is kind of a head scratcher for me, because it goes back to one of the things that Cole always says: you can't legislate morality. We can't legislate and say, hey, you can't be racist. We have to be more realistic about it, and utilizing government as a tool. The next one we have on here is pluralism and inclusion. Valuing diversity of race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and various ideas is a central core part of this belief system. It's not a one-size-fits-all identity. We're making space for everybody. And so I think that, again, that diversity of thought and diversity of ideas comes from a diversity of the makeup of those people.
And do you think that's one of the major differences
Yes.
between conservative and liberal?
Yes, but I think that that goes back to kind of the tradition of it all. I think that in many ways, conservatism, especially by today's definition, has a sense of this is what was good for the white man. This was who was in power, and we want to maintain that. And I'm not saying that that's right. I'm just saying that that tends to be kind of the perspective of things. You know, you talk about, or you hear people talking about, let's go back to the 1950s. That was when life was good. But the question that I always hear is, good for who?
Yeah.
Who was the 1950s good for? And when you really boil down the answer to that, the 1950s were good for white men, the privilege of that. And so I don't think that it should be a pillar of conservatism. I think that that's really sad to think about it being a pillar of conservatism, what is good for the white man.
Okay.
But I think that that is where one of the key differences is between especially modern conservatism versus today's liberalism, is we can make space for more people.
And I'm not sure that conservatism really has the intention of being what's good for the white man. I, I don't think that's accurate. And I know that gets a lot of attention, but I think it gets rolled around and confused sometimes because I don't really think that's the intention.
I agree. I don't think that it's the intention, but I do think that it has been systemically the impact.
Okay. I'll go there.
At a point in time, yeah. In modern society, I don't know that I would go quite that far with you, but I think it is one thing to say, hey, let's go back to the 1950s and it be associated with that being a great time for white men. And you're not wrong. It was a time, but it was also before the vast majority of our civil rights reforms took place, because a lot of that took place through the 60s and 70s.
Right.
I also think that you can say, hey, this is why this was such a good time for white men. We can use similar policies and apply them to everyone so that everyone gets that benefit of the 1950s white man life.
Yes.
It's not just for white men, but
Yes.
white men had so much advantage and had such a great era because of these policies that were implemented in their favor. If we can then utilize those same policies and apply them across the board in a much more fair fashion, I think that that may be a reasonable outlook to take.
Do you think conservatism can do that?
That's where I struggle.
I think it needs to be a balance. I think that there
Agree.
are some things that conservatives see that are important, like we talked about last week. The focus on the value of the family, the focus on individual freedoms and maintaining your rights, being able to protect your rights and exercise your rights, the ability to defend your rights from being infringed upon, the desire to not infringe upon other people's rights, which is not something that I think all modern conservatives or liberals practice, but I still think is a core tenet of both ideologies.
I agree. And I think that I struggle and really get hung up with that line of thinking when you look at it through the lens of what is happening in quote unquote conservatism today, how that is playing out in our society. I have no intention of saying, hey, MAGA equals conservatism. That is not what I am saying. But I am saying that like we said last week, the guise of conservatism is what is being used to apply all of these things. And so I think that is really frustrating, especially for somebody like me, to say, hey, we're going to take away your right to have an abortion should you need one. Not should you want one, should you need one, because my religion says this is what is the case, and that's what I want. And I want to push that on everyone else. And I think that when you look at, we talked about this briefly last week, when you look at the stance on immigration, I think that that's really hard to say, hey, we want what's best for everybody, and that execution that we're using is the best way to get there. I think that it's really hard to apply any semblance of compassion, any semblance of applying equal liberties and freedoms. I think that it's really hard to see through that guise of conservatism through the lens of the current administration to say, hey, we want to make sure that we're making things better for everyone, and our execution is going to accomplish that in the way that it is being handled today.
Well, and I think today we're lumping illegal immigration into all immigration.
Yes.
And that's not accurate.
Yes.
And I think most conservatives would say the same thing. I think they're very much focused on illegal immigration, not immigration as a whole, and they just get lumped together.
And I think that they get lumped together because of the current administration lumping them together. We are going to call them all rapists and criminals, and we're going to deport all of them, even if they're trying to go through the process legally, trying to do what we've asked them to do. We're just going to lump them all in together and say, you got to go.
Yeah.
And when you do that, again, it leaves a really bad taste in my mouth about what conservatism is, because of the lipstick that is being put on that pig right now.
Yeah. Just from a kind of slightly different perspective, I think it's very similar to our current justice system, and that I think many conservatives are willing to accept that it's not always going to be perfect and people are going to be unjustly prosecuted in these instances because they're casting a wider net to prevent the larger evil, the greater of the two evils here, which to them illegal immigration is. So I think they're willing to sacrifice, not to say that that's right, but that's just what I think their perspective is. I think that they are willing to say, okay, if this small amount of people who are trying to do it the right way are impacted negatively, that detriment does not outweigh the benefit.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of the cost of doing business, if you will. And I think they're okay with that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting, Cole.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, I'm going to keep going through these kind of core tenets of liberalism. So we talked about pluralism and inclusion. The next one on our list is freedom of expression, a strong defense of press freedom, of protest rights, and of personal autonomy. I think that especially in today's climate, you can see those things, and you can see the left, the woke left, rising up against those things, with NPR being shut down and people being upset about that, with various news outlets being cast out of the White House in favor of more far right-wing ones. I think that you can see that with the No Kings Parade, and you can see that in the protest of ICE in various cities and states across the country. And then you go into personal autonomy, protesting and being upset with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which, yes, I understand happened under the Biden administration in terms of timeline, but it was a push by the conservatives, by the right. And so I think that you see all of those people being up in arms about that personal freedom of expression. And so it is put on, that's the woke left. That's them being upset about these things. And I think that you can use that as a core tenet of liberalism.
Yeah. And I think that conservatives struggle with that a lot for some of the same reasons. So if your thing is press freedom, protest rights, and personal autonomy, which is talking about freedom of expression, you don't get to tell me what I can and can't say. So just because you think one way doesn't mean that just because I think a different way that it's wrong or that I can't say it. So I think conservatives take a lot of issue with those more liberally minded coming out and saying, hey, you have to use someone else's pronouns. No, I don't. That's my own freedom of expression. You don't get to tell me what I can and cannot say because I don't get to tell you what you can and cannot say. I can say that what you're saying is stupid, but I can't tell you not to say it.
Well, and it feels like a rubber band to me. We're stretching people one way or the other. And I think that in some aspects, that rubber band is being stretched too far and it's popping and it hurts. And I think that you could look at that from either perspective. You can talk about the pronouns. I think you could also look at it from the opposite view with all of the passage of these laws to have the 10 commandments in schools. Just because you think this way doesn't mean you need to force it on everyone else. Whatever that may be doesn't mean you need to force it on everyone else. And I think that the core foundation of liberalism is you guys do whatever you want and that's cool. We don't need to force you to do anything that we want. And I think that, again, you can see that rubber band snapping, saying, hey, you want us to accept this. You want us to do this. You want us to be this way or say this, but you're not willing to do the same. And I think that is very prevalent in today's society. I also think that goes back to a really, to me, frustrating perspective of I have to win. My team has to win. And so we're going to fight this, even though we don't really care. And in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter because we don't want to lose. And that sucks.
Yeah, we've got the wrong teams.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And then the last one here is the separation of church and state. Moral frameworks may be personal, but policy should be secular and representative. And that, again, brings up the 10 commandments being in classrooms. Just because that's what I believe doesn't mean that I need to shove your face in it.
Well, and it was really a tenet of founding fathers because of what they had come from, that separation.
Right.
But we wanted to have that separation. This
Isn't
isn't new.
Yeah. And honestly, I think this should be a tenet of American conservative political ideology.
Yeah.
I think that they should be very aware of why there is a separation of church, and it should be very important to them.
Right.
And do you think it has been in the past and that's just changed recently?
Yes.
I think that it has to do with I don't want to lose, and so I'm going to go above and beyond to win, to get my way. And that sucks.
So I was just kind of talking about this a little bit here, but Callie, you have a point about liberalism being far from monolithic. It is often a messy Thanksgiving Day family conversation. And one of the ones that you talk about here is free speech versus safe spaces. I'd like to get into this a little bit here because I think free speech should be your safe space. And understanding that other people have free speech is something that you have to realize, because you can build your own fortress with the way that you see and think and speak about things. But what you can't do is tell someone else that they can't have their own fortress.
Well, and I think that part of it, Cole, is the detriment to progress when we build those fortresses, because we end up siloing ourselves. This is me. This is what I think. I'm not letting anybody in. You cannot get through my moat of alligators. This is what it is. And we are detrimental to making progress and seeing somebody else's perspective. And I think that makes everything really, really hard. I can't talk to you. I can't understand you because you're in your own fortress. You're not willing to come out because we've made it an unsafe space. We've made common areas unsafe spaces.
To me, it really comes down to I have to be willing for you to have freedom of expression, but that's reciprocal. And if we stop with being reciprocal, and sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes I don't want to hear what you have to say if you're being so mean and awful. I don't want to hear that. And I have the right to say that. I don't want to hear you be ugly.
I was just going to say, like, this is my, right now, my Callie attempt to come in hat in hand and say, guys, I struggle. I'm having a hard time with this, because that's my liberal showing for exactly what you just said, Mom. I want you to have the freedom of speech. I want you to have the opportunity to express your feelings and emotions and frustrations with everything. You know, when you're sitting around with somebody and they're like, no offense, but, and then they say something offensive. I think that we have taken kind of that same mentality and applied it to the First Amendment. And for me personally, I have a hard time accepting that for exactly what you just said, Mom. I don't want you to be mean. And I think that that has a lot to do with, I don't want to be mean to you, so I expect you to not be mean to me back. And my expectation of that isn't everybody's expectation. And so I can't apply that and expect that from you. I don't want you to come in and say, I think that this girl's a total woke liberal and I think she should die. I don't think that that's right. But just because I don't think it's right doesn't make it wrong. Does that make sense?
But it comes back to that original thing of it's the common good, not the absolute freedom of the individual.
Right.
So even with expression, it has to be for the common good, not for the benefit of the individual.
That is where I think I get off track the most. Is, to me, the common good should not be superior to the rights of the individual. Because if the only way to achieve the common good is to infringe on people's rights, I don't think that that is actually the common good.
Yeah.
Personally.
Why isn't it?
Let's take this as an example. And I'm not saying that this is what you think, and it is a bit of an extreme example. I will grant you that. But let's say we are so fed up with gun violence, we are doing an outright ban on guns for all American civilians. All American citizens, you are no longer allowed to own firearms. That is for the common good. We are taking away the Second Amendment. We are revoking your right to keep and bear arms. And then we get invaded by Russia and China and Brazil and all of the other BRICS nations all at the same time. And it's us against the world. So we've eliminated gun violence on a domestic level because there are no more guns. That is for the common good. But now we don't have the ability to defend ourselves. And again, this is a very extreme example, but that is not actually for the common good.
And that would be my argument. Who determined that that was for the common good?
Well, because guns are dangerous, Mecca.
Right. But that's what I'm saying is any infringement upon rights that, per the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, are granted to us inherently by God. Who is the government to take those rights away to make things a little bit better or a little less bad? It all goes back to that old phrase, he who would sacrifice liberty for safety deserves neither liberty nor safety.
Well, and I think, Cole, that you could simplify it even further and say, hey, we're going to take out all of the guns, and now you can't go hunt for deer and provide food for your family.
You can't defend yourself if someone breaks into your home.
Right. And so that's where I just kind of, it's a balancing act. What's good for everybody and what's good for individuals, it's a tightrope, right? That we have to balance both ways and say, hey, this is why it is important. This is why it makes the most sense. This is why we can't please everyone.
Sure. And I don't disagree with you on that. I still don't think that infringement upon people's rights can ever be for the common good.
Yeah.
That's kind of my perspective on it. And so that's why I very much disagree with the sentiment that the common good is equivalent to
okay.
or superior to the rights of the individual.
So let me use mine. We're going to say that I have the right to scream fire in a public place, and I have that right.
You
and
do.
I do. Technically, I don't.
Technically, you don't, but
But what happens if I scream fire is that it panics everybody else around. Now, maybe some people will look at me and go, oh, she doesn't really mean that. But there'll be this group who will hurt themselves or have the potential to hurt themselves because I screamed fire, because they think that there is a danger there. And so, no, I don't think my individual right to scream fire outweighs that.
Because you utilizing your freedom of expression, your freedom of speech to scream fire is infringing upon other people's rights.
Which is what I said. the
Well,
good for all.
and I think that,
Right.
but that's where it gets really hairy. If you scream fire, the purpose is to evacuate everybody, right? But what if you scream fire after you've locked them all in a room?
Or if there's no fire.
Or if there's no fire. And so I think that we have to talk about the safety. We can vow to work to make our society safer without taking people's rights away.
Well, and I'm going to go to yours. I don't have the right to lock those people in a room.
I agree.
I mean, it could be my right, but so I guess what I'm trying to say, Cole, is I disagree with you on this blanket individual right thing. I definitely disagree with you on this because it does have to be weighed. It can't just be, I can do whatever the hell I want to do whenever I want to do it because it's my right to do that. It has to be weighed against everybody else, or you need to go and live on your own.
Right. And I understand that. But that's the thing. It's not the right to do whatever I want whenever I want to. It is the right to do what I want whenever I want to, so long as I am not infringing on someone else's same right. That's a very important clause there.
Okay. I did not hear the end of that from you.
So I'm gonna ask this question for you. And I feel like we had this conversation before we started the podcast, which was one of the kind of defining moments that we said, hey, we should start this podcast. But how do you apply that to the logic of seatbelt laws?
Well, I'm going to be personally I'm going to have a relatively libertarian stance on this, and I understand that it's probably relatively extreme. I don't think there should be seatbelt laws. I think if you want to be an idiot, then that's your right to be an idiot, and you will pay for that to a degree if you make a mistake. And if I make that same mistake, I will have that same level of consequence.
Okay, here's where I go, but if I'm the idiot that's not wearing my seatbelt and I cream somebody else who wasn't doing anything wrong at the time, then I have a responsibility to them. I mean, if you just ask me if I think the seatbelt law should be in place, no, but I'm still thinking about those people who got hit head on who weren't doing anything wrong.
Right, but you can't prevent that from happening. Seatbelt laws don't reduce head-on collisions.
But they do reduce the fatality of those head-on collisions.
Right, but it's not the government's job to keep me from doing stupid things.
Yeah.
Just like you can't regulate morality, you can't regulate intelligence either.
Well, I think my argument is not regulating intelligence, but the effect that your lack of intelligence has on somebody else.
Right, but me not wearing my seatbelt isn't what caused me to drive into you head on. They're separate issues from my perspective here.
Okay.
So then take and apply that same logic to drinking and driving. Do you believe that we should allow people to drink and drive?
At that point, you're infringing on someone else's safety. You are actively doing something that puts other people in harm's way, at risk, which is wrong. So same way I feel like if a corporation is polluting a river, same thing if you're drinking and driving.
Okay, so my next question is, since that's your libertarian viewpoint, why can't we all be freaking libertarians and just be happy? Golly.
Well, not everything libertarians believe is something that I agree with. That particular instance is something that I do happen to agree with.
Yes.
That I do, by and large, if I want to go and take opiates until I die, I get to do that, as long as I am not harming other people in the process.
Right. And I think that probably, I feel like that probably best illustrates the great divide between conservatives and liberals. If I want to go and do this and it doesn't harm anybody else, I should be allowed to, versus these are the rules that we need to all play by.
Nobody can do this because nobody's allowed to be harmed.
Yes.
I think you really have hit the nail on the head there.
Conservative? Nobody can do this?
No, that to me, that is what I see as liberals projecting. Nobody can do anything that could ever result in someone being harmed. So anything that could ever result in someone being harmed is now against the rules.
Gotcha. But see, I had to ask that question.
That's okay. That's great. That's what this conversation is for.
I know, but I look at tradition and sometimes I just am not sure. And if I'm not sure and I'm making a call on that without being clear, I'm not making a very good call. I'm not making an informed call.
Well, and I think that goes back to one of the things that I have in here. Tension isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of an ongoing negotiation of values and strategy. What it is that we as a country are choosing to prioritize and the ways in which we are willing to execute it, that really is, in my idea, kind of the idealism of it all. This is the perfect scenario. We're allowed to have tension. We are allowed to work through it. We are allowed to talk about it and disagree, but we need to find a solution that we're both comfortable and capable of executing to get there. To get somewhere.
There's another one that I want to touch on here, the identity versus class. Should activism focus more on racial and gender justice or economic class struggle? I mean, for me, very clearly, it should focus on economic class struggle. Because if you root that out, then you no longer have a need to focus on race or gender issues because everyone is on equal footing regardless. You don't need to focus on those things because to me, when you focus on those things, you proliferate them.
See, I almost feel the exact opposite. I feel like we should focus more on racial and gender justice because then it's all up to you. That goes back to the meritocracy of it all. If everybody's already equal, we've decided that everybody, whether you're this race or this gender, is all equal. What you do with that outcome is up to you.
See, that's exactly why I don't think we should focus on race and gender, because if you focus on it, you're saying, okay, we have to give these people preferential treatment because they are disadvantaged. Or you can just say, okay, no one is at a disadvantage. Everyone is on the same playing field. Let's make sure that economically speaking, everyone has the same opportunity, regardless of race, religion, creed, sex, gender, whatever you want to say. Instead of saying, oh, we need to pay women more, let's just say, why don't we just pay everyone the same?
Right, which is my point. So if we pay everybody the same, because it doesn't matter about their race or their gender, because that's what we fought for and have achieved, then the economics of it the chips fall where they may.
I mean, this is
So you agree with me?
I would say that you agree with me. Yeah. It feels like we're saying the same thing back and forth backwards.
But if you're focused on race and sex, how are you making it a level playing field for everyone? You're just giving a specific race or a specific sex an advantage.
I'm not asking for an advantage. I'm asking for equality.
Yeah. I see both of you.
Because we're essentially saying the same thing. It's just the execution in the direction of how we get there.
So if I start a company and I say, I am going to do this thing that says we have preferential hiring practices for Black people or women, that now makes me anti-white man. So I've now created animosity between these two groups of people because I am focusing on Black people and women. Or I could say, regardless of what you look like, you can come work for me as long as you are the best at what you do. I don't care which one of those promotes racism more. So that is specifically not focusing on sex or gender. That is specifically focusing on economic equality, regardless of race or gender.
But it's the activism to achieve it. And I think right now the fight is, for me, that the focus should be on making everyone equal so that the economics come after. If we don't focus on the gender and race of it, then there's nothing economic to fall after that. I feel like this is very much like a chicken or the egg conversation.
It's the same thing as one of the editors at Tangle writing about his daughter going to school. And it was during Black History Month. And the first thing that they walked into was a book called Hey Little Black Girl, something along that line. And he didn't want them to recognize her as a Black girl. He wanted them to recognize her from her heart and compassion and who she was. So I understand, Cole, what you're saying. If you address it without that
emphasis,
emphasis, then you can focus a little bit more on just making it equal.
Fair for everyone, period.
Fair for
I
everyone.
shouldn't recognize you as a black man. I should recognize you as Kevin or John or David or Darius or whatever. I should recognize you as an individual person, not as a black person. I shouldn't recognize you as a woman. I should recognize you as Callie.
Yeah. Okay. We've beat that one. Let's go.
So, I mean, I think that leads perfectly into your next question here. What is being liberated?
Liberation from inherited systems, racism, sexism, and classism.
But you can do that without looking at those specifically. You can do that from a you're saying, Cole, from a financial standpoint versus from a demographic standpoint.
Yeah, I'm not helping you. I'm not giving you a hand up because you're a woman or because you're black. I'm helping you or giving you a hand up because you're a person. So we've talked a lot about kind of how we see things differently. Let's talk about kind of some of the trade-offs between the two. What's the cost of constant change? I mean, there obviously are some advantages to having a system that evolves and improves and gets better. But if it starts to change too quickly, eventually that starts to bring a level of chaos. So what's the trade-off there? What is the cost? Specifically, one of the examples that we have here is student loan forgiveness, free community college. I think there's more than just an economic cost to that. To be perfectly honest, I think the economic cost is certainly worth the payoff. If you have more educated citizens, if you have people who are more capable of doing more things, then I think that is a pro to your economy.
And a benefit to your society.
Yeah, very much so. I also think that requires that instruction to be diverse, to not have one skew one way or the other. I think it very much requires that education, particularly if it is one that we as a society are providing for, is a very diverse education where you're not just learning about different things, but you're learning about different things from multiple perspectives so that you have the most amount of information to try and form an opinion, to try and make a decision on those things. But I also think that it comes at great social cost. I think generationally speaking, you didn't get free college, Mom. You didn't have free community college. You didn't have an opportunity for student loan forgiveness. Trey, probably being Gen X, didn't have those opportunities. So now if we start giving those opportunities to the new generations, I think that there's an opportunity for some strife, for some spite to come into that equation to say, I didn't get those and I turned out all right. Why do I have to pay for someone else?
Well, and I've been pretty vocal about some of the conservative values leaving a bad taste in people's mouth. And I think that that's a really good example of liberal ideals leaving a bad taste in people's mouth for exactly that reason. I didn't have that leg up. I didn't have that opportunity. So why should they get it? That really does create unnecessary strife. But at the same time, I feel that it is important. We talk about it on this podcast specifically. You need to be educated. Educate yourself, what that looks like, what that means, and the benefit of that. And I think that we tend to kind of skip over the cost of it. And that is really important. I think that not only the fiscal cost, Cole, I agree with you. I think that the fiscal cost is worth it because the emotional well-being and toll that is taken is much more easily rectified and remedied. And then again, we are today educating the leaders of tomorrow to lead us, to do our bidding, to be our representatives. And if we're not educating them today, how does that give us an opportunity to be pissed off that they're uneducated tomorrow?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make sense.
At the same time, I also see potential detriments to socializing education at that level. I do think that there should still be private opportunities for education.
Sure.
Because we have seen how well our government currently manages many of our social welfare programs. like Social Security, like Medicare and Medicaid, and that those systems with the level of bureaucracy that they have are relatively easy to take advantage of. That there is a lot that can get hidden behind the loopholes in red tape. And so I think we have to be careful about how we go about it. But I also think that in the long run, a more educated society is going to be beneficial. I also think that it's really important when we say, hey, you get free college, but you don't get to go to college for underwater basket weaving, because we don't need underwater basket weavers. We need mechanics. We need plumbers. We need carpenters. We need engineers.
Well, and I think that there has to be
3 out of 4 of those that you said don't necessarily require a college education.
But most of them do require some level of education, like a
And
trade
maybe that's
school.
the difference.
an
Yeah.
apprenticeship. But I also think that there has to be limits on those things. You cannot go to school to be a mechanic forever. You
Yeah.
cannot be a
And if you
professional
go to
student.
school and be a mechanic, the rest of us aren't going to pay if you decide you want to go to school to be a plumber now.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw this in. It's a little bit related. I saw a reel with James Tellerico, who we've been watching a little bit, and he is talking about school vouchers in Texas. And he is not kind about it. He says that the Texas governor has sold out and that the far right with Dunn and I can't remember the other name, the goal is to privatize that. And all that's doing is taking money out of the regular Joe, the nurse, the firefighter, out of their pockets to send their children, the wealthiest children, to school on vouchers that they're already sending them to that school for, paying for them to go to those schools anyway. And so I think that's part of the chaos that I think when we talk about the constant change is it does create chaos, and it does create an avenue for things to be mishandled, like school
Taken
vouchers
advantage
for the
of.
wealthy. And so you have to somehow figure that cost and look at it. And part of that may be some government oversight or committee oversight of some kind so that we prevent this from going off the rails.
Yeah, but you have to manage that, and you have to do it in a way that mitigates the potential for special interests to come in and start influencing those decisions that are being made, which
The
is very
problem
much
is,
not what is happening right now.
I started to say, that's exactly what's going on now that's got us in a lot of trouble here.
Well, and
And this is across the board. That's on way more than just education. That's in
Absolutely.
every industry.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But I also think that we need to take a step back from policy and just talk about truly the cost of constant change. So if I have a wardrobe of however many pieces, whether that is 20 pieces or 500 pieces, and then tomorrow I decide I don't like any of those pieces and I want to go buy an entire new wardrobe, 20 pieces or 500 pieces, I have to pay for those. And
you need places to put them.
And you need places to put them. And maybe I donate all of my current wardrobe, and that's well and good, but still that fickleness comes at a really high cost. And it doesn't matter where I shop. It doesn't matter where I shop. That cost doesn't have to be incurred if I am planning wisely, if I'm utilizing my resources wisely, because I'm paying attention. And that's not to say that somebody can't go shopping tomorrow and get a new outfit. Sure, fine. But you need to be planning efficiently. I saw something at one point where it was talking about we don't want the government to run like a business because a business is prioritizing profits. We want our government to run like a household because a household prioritizes its people. And I think that we can apply that same kind of logic here. We, the people, are the priority of the American government. The corporations and the billionaires should not be, in my personal opinion, the priority of our government. And so we need to be prioritizing how our funds are spent. If that means our funds are spent on going to get you a better education, great, let's do that. If our funds are spent on you're bored with your outfit today, so let's go get you a new one, Or even you guys, you're bored with your gender and so you want to go get a sex change. That's not the responsibility of this household. And I don't say that because I think sex changes are bad or wrong. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how we hold our government accountable for the spending and the priorities that it has, and how those things filter down to the rest of us.
So just to throw this out, you're talking about gender changes. And if I go back and I look at, is that for the common good? I don't think I can follow with that.
What do you mean?
She's saying it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
She's saying that it's
I'm
That's personal to
agreeing.
you. And
Yes.
I shouldn't be getting in your way. If that's what you want to prioritize spending your money on, good for
But
you.
it's your money.
but you
But
don't
it's
get to
your
spend
money.
my money on it.
But you don't
Yeah.
get to spend my money on it. You don't get to spend our money on it.
Yeah.
If that's what you want to do, fine. But you have to do it yourself.
So, I mean, I think that's a good example of inclusivity coexisting with an ideological boundary. So, and I certainly think that those two can coexist. I think you can say
Absolutely.
we can all share this same space and feel differently about how to improve it, but that doesn't mean that one of us gets to take over and dictate the best way. We all have to decide together what the best way forward is. And that regulates the rate of change, because now we have to take the time to sit down and have a discussion about it to say, okay, I'm sorry that you don't feel comfortable in your own body, and you're welcome to make changes to it that make you feel better. But that is not the responsibility of the rest of us to help you facilitate that.
Right.
It is the responsibility of the rest of us to not hold that against you if that is the decision that you make.
Yes. I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that that's where I kind of struggle with what is being kind of classified as liberalism today. Anything and everything we have to do from the government. Big government is not the answer. I don't at all believe that. I think our government is way too big as it is. I think we are erroneously spending in pretty
Out of
much
control.
every category, out of control, uncategorically out of control. And that is where I struggle. That is where I get frustrated, because you can do exactly what it is that you want to do, but we don't have to pay for it. We are
Or legislate it.
collective. We don't have to legislate it. Doesn't have to be spent on that. But like Cole said, we shouldn't be detrimentally thinking of you either.
I think that's a great point.
We also shouldn't be bailing out massive corporations that have run themselves poorly.
Amen. Gosh, y'all, I think that goes back to that whole thing that we all got screwed. We as a nation of we the people got screwed when we decided that corporations have the same rights as individuals. And I think
Amen.
that is wrong.
Yep.
I agree.
Look at us. We're unanimous.
So
Such liberals.
there's one more question we have here to go over before we get into our weird thought, and that is idealism a strength or a blind spot?
I think it's both.
I think it's both.
I do too, because it's great to imagine a perfect world, but there has to be a way to achieve it that is reasonable. You can't just say the world is going to be perfect because I said so. It doesn't work like that.
Yep. And you have to be willing to work for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we wouldn't be where we are today without some level of idealism. But just going right back to that last point of having to control the rate of change, you have to regulate your idealism to say, hey, this is the outcome that I want. But in order to get to that outcome, I can't just jump from here to that outcome. I have to take steps and make these small changes over time so that we can acclimate to this different society, this new and better society.
These
Well,
are the
and so you can-
sacrifices I have to make.
You can garner a consensus too.
Also, yeah, exactly.
I mean, if you do this without a consensus, you're
You're not making a utopia, you're making a dystopian dictatorship.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Well, and I think that one of the other questions that we have in here kind of underneath that, can compassion be a political strategy or a liability, kind of reads right into this. And again, I think it can be both. And I
Maybe
think
both.
that starts at a you personal level of having to police that. I need to to function within a strict boundary of being compassionate to others, but I also have to maintain my backbone. I have to maintain my sense of right and wrong. I have to maintain my sense of being stepped on. And I think that we have to be really careful to police ourselves individually and work that up. Work that up to your school board and your local city council, and work that up to your state representatives and legislatures, and work that up to the people we have in Congress and in the White House, no matter the administration. That goes both ways. And I think that we have to be really careful to, again, toe that line of what is good and what becomes dangerous, and when we're going off the deep end either way.
And what happens if in that level of liability we decide that something, someone isn't worth the compassion?
Worth the sacrifice?
Mm-hmm.
I think it has to be addressed really specifically.
Trolley problem.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we all can, like, there is not one correct answer to the trolley problem. You could make a case for a multitude of different answers. And so I think that we have to recognize the nuance of it and be willing to have those conversations and be willing to compromise and say, okay, in this particular instance with the trolley, this is how we're going to answer it. This is how we are going to answer it. This is how I am choosing. That doesn't make me the end all be all, but this is how I choose to answer that question. And I think that we're allowed for those answers to vary depending on today versus tomorrow versus 1950.
And I think sometimes they're going to be hard, or sometimes they're going to be sad.
Yeah. But going back several episodes now, jumping back to Cole's quote from the happiness episode, if you don't know hardship, you can never understand joy. You have to be able to have both to recognize one versus the other.
You have to have light and shadow in order to see depth in anything.
Correct.
Good talk, you guys.
Okay. Talk to me about bagels. What's going on with bagels?
So the question is, why are bagels only partially cut? And
They're
then,
lazy.
That's what I thought.
I mean, that could be part of it. But basically, they're cut to preserve freshness. That's when they're not cut all the way through. Because if you cut them all the way through, A, they have the potential to dry out more. B, they have the potential to move more in transit. So
why cut them at all? They're not even cuts.
Some of them aren't. And the reason some of them don't get cut is so that you can decide how big of a slice of bagel you want on your own. But basically, it's freshness. Packaging and handling is better because they don't separate and they stay together the way that they're supposed to. Customer convenience is a little bit of that. And this is weird, but it costs less for the manufacturer to not cut them completely.
So don't cut them at all and get all of the same benefits, because it is not convenient. The partial cuts in bagels, like you get a bagel and one of them's cut here, the other one is cut here, and you try and pull it apart and it tears in half. Just stop cutting them. Let me cut my own bagel.
Well, then start buying the kind that aren't pre-cut.
Is that an option?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
this is one of those needless innovations that isn't actually innovative.
Yeah. I mean, but also, like, I just want to know if somebody was putting together an RFQ for XYZ bagel company and they're like, you know what? We could save money if we didn't drop the blade 100% of the way. Only 70. Let's present that to them. We're going to save them all this money by not cutting the whole bagel.
Innovation.
Weird. Now I'm hungry.
Me too.
Okay, who's got my good story?
Okay. I have a good news story about Jelly Bean, the magpie. Jelly Bean, the magpie, and...
A magpie is a bird, right?
Yeah, so a magpie is kind of like a crow, but like with white shoulders.
Okay.
Super intelligent, kind of like a little bird. So there was a woman in England, and this was back in 2020, named Sandy Gillard, who throughout her entire life has run a bit of like an animal rescue out of her home, working mostly with like wild animals, bunnies, little birds that are injured, lots of local wildlife that she had always kind of taken in and helped recuperate and then released back into the wild. And she's done this for her entire life. So in 2020, Sandy, who was, I want to say about 70 at the time, if I remember right, fell out of a second story window and
Ouch.
hit her head on her driveway. So she fell out, broke several bones, fractured her skull, was in really, really bad shape, and was kind of there by herself. Her husband wasn't aware that she had fallen out of the window, and she was hurt pretty bad. And a couple minutes after her fall, she wakes up to a light tapping on her head, and it kind of rouses her back to consciousness. And it is Jellybean, the magpie, who is a little bird that she had facilitated the recovery of when, as a nestling, had fallen out and injured herself. So she nursed her back to health and eventually released her back to the wild. But she always kind of remained in the area and would stop by and see her very regularly. Magpies are very intelligent and, similar to crows, can develop relationships with animals outside of themselves and outside of their own species. So pretty regularly they develop relationships with humans. And Jellybean ends up waking up Sandy with these light taps on her head so that Sandy can now call her husband, who's able to call a team of paramedics who are able to come and get her and take her to the hospital and have her care flighted out. And the doctor said, if you had stayed like that for just a few more minutes, you'd be dead. You wouldn't be here with us anymore. You wouldn't have survived. So little Jellybean the magpie, who was nursed back to health by Sandy, ends up kind of returning the favor later on in life
Oh, gosh.
by just checking on her to make sure that she's okay and waking her up so that she can receive medical attention. It was just a really heartwarming story, which is why you should always be nice to animals, because when you're nice to animals, they have a tendency to be nice back.
I love that.
I was a little worried there for the minute when you were talking about Sandy. It did not sound like a good news story.
Nope, it was a very good news story. Sandy made a full recovery.
Oh, yay.
I
Go
love
Sandy
that.
and Jellybean.
So cute.
Love it. Thanks for my good story.
Yep. Good one, Cole.
Love you guys.
Love you guys.
Love y'all.
Bye.